In this podcast series, we focus on issues related to applied health and care research that aims to have an impact to the real world, particularly in relation to strengthening equity. But what is impact and how do we achieve it? I'm Katerina, your host for this episode, and I'm joined by two colleagues from Lancaster University, Glyn Jones, who is Partnership Development Manager for the Health Innovation Campus. Glyn, would you like to explain what that means and what the Health Innovation Campus is?
Thank you, Katerina. The Health Innovation Campus is a £41 million investment by the university to tackle the health issues in the Northwest in the main, but we have a global reach, obviously. It hosts a medical school and a division of health research. 50% of the building is for collaboration and engagement space. The role I have, along with the health partnership team, is to provide opportunities for engagement around health, population health, equity, and using the medical school students and academics and the division of health research and biological life sciences to create the conversations we need. We host businesses, we host events, we just catalyze conversations.
And Ross Dachraoui, who is Impact Development Management. Ross, your turn. What does that job role really mean?
So the job role is predominantly inward-facing with academics at Lancaster University. I support two faculties, that's Health and Medicine and the Management School. That support really is around kind of two sides of the same coin. So supporting academics to think about, plan for, articulate, and to some extent achieve impact from their research. And then the other side is helping them to get the evidence of that impact and to sort of report that as well. So that's internally, but also for large-scale research assessment exercises, such as the Research Excellence Framework.
Thank you both and welcome to our podcast. We've been having discussions around impact within the ARC Northwest Coast and looking on the website of the National Institute for Health and Care Research, so the NIHR. It defines impact as the demonstrable contribution that research makes to society and the economy of benefit to individuals, organizations, and nations. And whilst all three of us are linked to academia and health research, there is slightly a different angle that we take. So what does impact mean within each of your work contexts?
From my viewpoint, it's about involving as many people as we can in the work generally we do, but also in understanding how that research that's been done is going to impact. We look at outputs and outcomes as well as impact. So impact's more long-term, and to get to that, we aim to get, in terms of outputs, how many people meet, how many businesses we've dealt with, outcomes in a sort of short 6 to 12 months, and then impact later. So it's a journey towards translating that research into the real world.
So for me, impact is, it's very much central to my role, and there are a couple of elements to it. So there is the kind of cultural and sort of developmental side of impact, because whilst it's been around within higher education for quite a while now, so 10 years plus, there is still some mystery around it within sort of some pockets of the university and the sector at large. And that's because it's somewhat of a new addition to the demands of research. And I think it is not yet fully embedded within the mindset of researchers as part of the research life cycle, let's say. So that's part of the role. And then, the other sort of side of it is maximising the impact from the university's point of view, because it's an income generating part of the way that the university operates. It's also about celebrating the impact as well. So whilst taking into account the sort of income generating side, it's also about making sure that impact is recognised at whatever scale that it is achieved at.
I think you tapped into something important there. There's still a lot of myth busting to do around impact because it's that big concept, but how does it translate in practice, isn't it? So we've been talking about researchers, we've been talking about organizations and the economic aspects of it all for the whole of the university. Whose responsibility is impact, would you say?
Impact can look differently to different people. I suppose innovation, we're a health innovation team, so innovation could be one type of impact. But more importantly, I think it's transformation of services we can innovate, but then how do we help clinical services, social care, take on those proposed changes and make a difference? So I think that's where it's everybody's responsibilities, from the academic through to the citizen at the other end, really. We're all responsible for our own healthcare. And that's part of that myth busting, I think. People should be more activated in their own health as opposed to throwing themselves on the health system. And the university can help with that through knowledge exchange and impact.
I agree with Glyn there, actually, because it may sound somewhat ideological to say that impact is everyone's responsibility, both inside and outside of the research institution. But when you're talking about the design and the operation of actual health services, then we'd all want those to be as evidence-based as possible, and also based on the latest evidence and the knowledge that we have around good practice as it stands today. So there is push and the pull factor that's play there to say that, well, can't just have responsibility lying with one group of individuals. But I guess at the more practical side of things, ultimately, I suppose the responsibility lies with the researchers themselves, because they are the creators of the knowledge and they are the ones that are best placed to translate that. As long as we are supporting them sufficiently to do that, then that's where the locus of responsibility lies, and then everyone is there to support that more widely.
I'd like to think that a well-designed research project has its impact already as part of what it's researching, if you like. Not just the pure subject matter, but also how it's rolled out. And I think through things like the knowledge exchange framework, those will become more reality, if you like. So you're also looking not just at what makes something tick, but how do we then translate that? That's all part of ideally of the funding as well, that we need to secure it to create that impact in the long term. Otherwise, we have some great research, pure research, if you like, but by involving those different groups that we can involve through the HIC, through the Health Innovation Campus and through the university, is a bit of a relay, in a way, from, as Ross says, the subject area experts and those that instigate the research are the academics. But there's going to be a hand-holding and a sort of relay of that knowledge, and as it's relayed, it's transferred and transformed into impact at the other end of the spectrum, if you like, in terms of practice, in terms of citizen behaviour, in terms of social care.
So I take it the message is when one is doing a research study, they need to be planning for impact from the very beginning. How do they do that? And you mentioned there's support from the university. What type of support is that?
I'm not a researcher, but I understand that most research projects have this sort of phase where dissemination was part of it, and that tends to be going to a conference or whatever and talk about a paper. But the university holds a series of impact acceleration grants now from various research councils, and they are aimed at specifically this, I think, about translating research out into the community. And I'd like to see impact acceleration, so more as part of, if you win a grant that includes impact acceleration, as opposed to being an adjunct at the moment that you apply for separately. Why not roll the whole thing in and bring in more sort of experiential aspects to the research as well?
I'd add to that by saying that it's almost as if the impact acceleration accounts are there to kind of mop up or take account of where research projects haven't quite built into their plan the engagement work that would be required to engage with potential beneficiaries. I mean, that isn't fair in all cases, of course, because things arise that just are opportunistic, and perhaps the impact acceleration accounts are there to help researchers take advantage of those. But yeah, for the most part, if a research project has been designed such that the engagement of the process and of the findings, once that's done in such a way that partners are adequately engaged, then a lot of the time it becomes kind of self-perpetuating and doesn't therefore need that additional resource in order to make things happen. But yeah, I mean, we are talking about the kind of ideal scenario there, and it's not black and white by any means.
I think impact acceleration accounts have been a bonus for us in terms of partnership development managers, because they're mandated, if you like, that they involve business or community organisations, so non-academic organisations. Lots of academics can be nervous of business and profit making from research, but I think if we look at it in terms of sustainability, funding ongoing community interest companies or whatever it takes, that's where that long-term impact comes from as well, because it's about sustainability of impact, not just creating some impact, but keeping it going. And that's, in a way, it then needs more research to look at how things are going. So a plan, do, check, act sort of cycle. You get the research done, the impact is underway, but then the real world will morph and change. So those disciplines still need to be there. The research disciplines need to be there in impact as well. So it sort of morphs from research to impact back to research around that plan, do, check, act sort of cycle. And those are the skills that would make a very, very interesting research projects that will be sustainable and self-funding. If there's a business element, it doesn't have to be profit-making, but if there is a business element, it can feed back on itself and create its own vehicle, if you like, for taking it forward. I think that's what the Health Partnership team can help with.
And talking about that cycle there, Glyn, I think you touched upon the fact that we have to go back and measure impact. It's about the contributions being demonstrable, right? How do we measure impact? Is that where the research excellence framework comes in, Ross?
I think that is one of the main stimuli, if you will, for the sector wanting to measure and to evaluate the impact of research. I do recognise the input there, and I guess what the Research Excellence Framework has done, arguably, I mean, it depends who you ask, but from my point of view, what it's done quite well is to enhance the culture around the assessment of the impact of research, such that we're not just thinking now about impact being an end goal. I think a lot of people are recognising that impact is actually, it's a journey, and in most cases, there isn't really what you would define as an end goal because the story evolves. In terms of the actual measurement itself, the REF has certainly put a rocket up the backside of the sector. I think I probably want to cut that bit out, but...
But I guess one thing is those changes in policy and practice in health, but the other one that goes towards showing impact is the creation of those partnerships that you are, Glyn, and some of them, a lot of the times it goes through informal channels or informal networks that one day you can say there's an impact, there's clear pathway to an impact we can show.
Yeah.
But how do you measure that in the meantime?
The health partnership team and partnership development managers across the university are funded from something called HIFE, the Higher Education Innovation Fund. And we get our allocation of HIFE from a separate survey called HEBSIS, the Higher Education Business Community Interaction Survey. And it's that, in reality, I suppose, if REF is a measure for academia, then for us, professional services, then HEBSIS is the way we demonstrate our value by showing how many we interact with community, with SMEs, around collaborative research, on commercial research, on knowledge transfer partnerships. They're all components of a strategy to do that engagement that will reach, hopefully, to impact. And you're right, you need to not filter at all, I think, in the role we have, because you never know when you might need to speak to whoever it is you've met. So we're lucky we have a client relationship management system, a CRM. It's a sort of rather mundane bit of software that a lot of businesses use, but we're bringing that approach into the university so we don't forget who you're speaking to. And thankfully, I've not lost my marbles yet, so I can remember, I did speak to somebody about paediatric audiology once, and now we've met the National Deaf Children's Society, then maybe that would be a relevant link. So partnership development, a professional skill in itself, is managing that. But the way we're measured and how we show our value is through things like HEBSIS and obviously the knowledge exchange framework as well, which looks at the same things: engagement with business, engagement with communities.
Being in the health and care business, all of us, targeting health inequalities, now legal responsibility for local authorities, for the NHS Trust, where would you place that in our discussion so far, especially when it comes to measurement?
I think at the moment, trying to unify it all is an ongoing activity, I suppose. That we measure, because of our different backgrounds, different funding, that we are, in the end, beholden to our funding bodies, and we have to show impact whichever way they feel they need to see it. Joining it together, the academic community will hopefully value more and more the partnership development work because it helps them with KEF, and it also helps them now with promotion. Promotion criteria now includes engagement and impact, those sorts of activities. And I think Lancaster, and I'm sure every other university, is morphing as we go towards that new, different way of working, a different future, if you like, where research excellence is the key, always. We are a university after all. But it's more about taking that and interacting, so that we should see more activity in that space, I think, about bridging across into schools or into businesses or into charities, proving the effectiveness of our research in the real world.
I actually think that the Research Excellence Framework is also starting to recognise that the measurement of impact in its own right is an insufficient picture of the value, let's say, that research translation activity has within society, because there are a number of instances in sort of previous exercises where, just by virtue of serendipity, an institution was able to show massive impact. And that, that could be leveraging like the brand of the institution, just right place, right time, etc. So in a coming exercise in a few years' time, one of the changes I'm very pleased about is the fact that they are going to reward more the activities along the way to achieve an impact. And that should hopefully bring a bit more balance to the debate and actually reward institutions who are who are trying to mobilise the knowledge that they're creating, as well as obviously rewards institutions where that translation has had a big hitting end result that's positive.
I think serendipity is like a secret weapon, really. You shouldn't discount the benefit of just hanging around, talking to people. We're all salespeople, I suppose. Maybe that's my background is business development commercially. So maybe that's another skill we should value more, not decry, but actually say it's about getting on with people. There's that thing about the harder you practice, the luckier you get. Was that Arnold Palmer supposedly quotes about golf? But if we carry on doing what we do in the Health Innovation Campus, in the events we do, the collaboration cafes, the business bites events, then we'll get those contacts we need and people will come to us. We'll break down barriers, because when you ask business, what does the university do for you? Not many know what they could do. So if that's still a question they have in their minds, then getting them involved in impact will take a bit longer, because we have to show them we're not just pure research anymore. It's not just the ivory towers. And I think Lancaster does this very well in terms of its anchor institution roles and things like Eden. We hosted the vaccination centre, 62,412, I think, injections we gave. That's 40,000 people that visited the Health Innovation Campus that probably wouldn't have. So there's those very mundane, basic steps we can take towards impact. Once we've got those in place, we can build on towards the good stuff that we do more specifically.
But I think there's something there about valuing the pathway to impact, as you say, because it's certainly something I struggle with in my work, that time period to actually measure impact, because we know change doesn't happen overnight. There's all those reports between research outcomes and actually practice or policy changes having 17 years in between. So when would you say is the right time to measure impact?
Could I just pull you up on that 17 years thing?
Yes, please do.
Because when I was in the NHS, I used to wind me up no end. That 17 years figure comes from American pharmaceutical studies back in the 60s and 70s. People say it takes the NHS 17 years to implement innovation. That's not true, to be polite. And I've done some research on this, even though I'm not a researcher. The NHS does not take 17 years at all. And I think we could do impact much quicker nowadays anyway. If it's not innovation, it's other forms of change that we can achieve.
Like, how quick can we do that impact? At what time should we look at measuring it?
It's an interesting question about when does impact stop, because I don't think there's an end to impact. It carries on as long as we can carry on changing. So there shouldn't be a decision made. We thought we might affect 1,000 people and we've done that, so we'll stop now. But that doesn't feel right either. This is the beginnings of impact, but I don't think there should be an end to impact for any given study. What do you think?
It's an interesting question in terms of measurement and timing. And one of the ways that I look at this is that, well, when you look at it across an absolute scale or similar, impact arises the moment that you communicate research to someone who wasn't aware of it before. So their understanding of an issue has been updated. Now, do you measure impact at that point? Do you give them a survey to say, okay, so how has your understanding of this issue changed? And then sort of gleefully skip into the Vice Chancellor's office and say, look at the impact of my work. That probably, isn't a sound investment of your time. So the question is, at what point do you then recognise that the impact is valuable enough to shout about, really? This is one of the aspects of impact that is both a science and an art, because at the end of the day, we are talking about subjective measures of benefit, because what one person would perceive as being beneficial impact would perhaps, in relation to another change, not be valued quite as greatly by someone else. And, also the flip side of this, which is another conversation entirely, but we tend to only look for the benefits of the impact of our research. We spend no time and resource in actually looking at it in the round, because typically for every winner, there is usually a loser in some way. It doesn't tend to be the case so much in health research, and especially with regards to health inequalities, because generally speaking, as long as we can say that someone at some point in the kind of health and care system has experienced an improvement to their life, well, you wouldn't want to look for a loser in that scenario, but there probably will be if you look hard enough. So in terms of when to look for or when to measure impact, it really is kind of context dependent. There isn't a heuristic that you can reliably use in each instance. But when we're talking about submission to something like the Research Excellence Framework, typically we're looking for an instance where the research has led to some sort of change within a system that is there to support individuals in the sort of at the community level or other level that has been informed by research, and that we are able to then measure that benefit to either the institution who has taken up the research, or more ideally, measure the benefit for the individuals who use that service as a result of the improved way of doing business, if you look at it that way. So yeah, it's not a black and white situation.
I assume, Ross, research obviously could show that this isn't good, as well as there is good here, that this intervention, this idea isn't going to be sustainable or isn't going to work or didn't quite achieve the target. So in that case, we wouldn't do impact with them at all, really. So there is a failure in terms of innovation failing fast. There's not necessarily a case for impact from every piece of research either, because they'll self-limit in that you might find, well, actually, our research shows the thing isn't as effective as we thought, so we're not going to bother. But isn't that impact in a way, anyway, the fact that there's no success and no positive outputs from the research, at least we could stop that now, fail fast and go back and look for something else. So there is a sort of impact there, but not the impact we're thinking about, or I'm thinking about anyway, which is taking it out into the real world.
So I'd see that as both impact and research in the same sentence almost, because I guess you could say that there's the impact of the fact that the partner who has tried to introduce an intervention that's informed by research has found that it doesn't actually provide the benefits that were anticipated. Well, I guess that has updated their understanding of how this particular evidence could be used or not in that instance. But on the flip side, the researchers get the kind of research data on that to say, okay, so in this instance, with this context, these players, etc., this didn't work so well. So then, hopefully that would then inform research projects that follow on from that.
Because that impact, again, health economic arguments versus improvements to mental health or something. You could have some great improvements to mental health, but if it's £1 million a patient, the health economics argument doesn't fly as well. So impact is as broad as it is wide, I suppose, in terms of which aspect do you look at. When I came to the university with a research project that was in the NHS, I didn't know the first thing about measures, research proven measures, things like WEBs or PAM13. I didn't realise those things existed. And having seen them, we used 4 different measures as well as a health economics measure on the research we were doing. And that showed you not what you expected to see at all, but trying to convince commercial businesses that their products aren't going to work is a very difficult position to be in, because they've invested not necessarily research money, but they've definitely invested business development money in that. There's impact and there's impact. There's impact on the citizens, there's impact on business and the clinicians and the wider system as well, that I now understand better from working here at the university. So it's never an easy question.
Hearing you both speak, the question that gets raised for me is one research study enough for impact, or is it impact at scale that we're looking at, and what does it take then to have impact at scale?
So another question in innovation is adoption and spread. I say another question, it's another challenge. Innovation can be very focused on innovation, just invent a better heart valve. But that's in the NHS context, and I think in the university's context, innovation is that whole adoption life cycle as well. And there are agencies out there, the Innovation Agency, one of the Academic Health and Science Networks, which its job is to look at that side of it as well. So it's multi-aspect, I suppose. And it's just a question of collective will moving things forward. One research study is as good as any. I don't know if there's a gearing between the number of research studies and the impact any one of them can achieve. Because what I see in one decent research study and a good impact pathway would be as good as anything, I suppose.
That's my experience too. One research study is enough. Every research study is kind of standing on the shoulder of the body of work that informed it up to that date. Now, I know that there are many debates within research, so you can't say that necessarily one line of inquiry or one body of evidence points to an objective truth or anything like that. Yeah, typically speaking, one research study, like Glyn says, the quality is there. There's no reason why that can't be impactful in its own right.
So what we're saying today is it's important to involve the right stakeholders, whether that's from all sorts of sectors, the community, from the very beginning of any research, planning for impact from the very beginning. That your impact actually starts by the minute you start sharing anything about that research. You start that knowledge transfer journey, isn't it? But then at what point you measure impact, it really comes down to the context of why you're measuring. And it could be, is enough to measure impact of one study if you're specifically looking for that. But possibly when we're talking about policy practice change is likely to be a group of those that we're looking at, but at the same time, looking at partnerships, looking at those informal pathways that get created along the way. All those things are parts of the impact to be measured. We tend to like to close those podcasts on a positive, but also inspiring and kind of high aiming point. So my last question to you two is, what is your vision for the future in terms of how can impact work contribute to health equity and also challenge the current status quo of how we're doing things?
I think it's about a collaboration. I've said this before. I'd like a sign on the way into the Health Innovation One building that says "Park your ego here," and that is so that people can come into that space and see themselves as equal with everybody else. I know there are distinguished people around, and there are citizens, both of whom have their own experiences. So there's something about being the best collaborators we can that will blur the boundaries, I suppose, between research there and impact here and ongoing changes that are needed, and just creates different, more dynamic things. I think funding bodies, research councils, are valuing collaborative research approaches more than just pure research. When it works, I suppose, then I'm sure there's some stuff that is probably better staying on the bench. But in my vision, it's self-aware, self-informed research, building research capacity through patient public involvement. I think that's something the faculty are majoring on at the moment. By involving somebody in a research study, you're going to have an impact there, aren't you? If we bring a business in as a collaborator or recruit 100 patients, but even at the very start, that's an impact because it's changed their view of, well, I can get involved in research. It's not just for the Golden Triangle or whatever it can happen to be. So there is impact all the way through, I think, and it's celebrating that and breaking down those barriers. I think celebration is probably the key word there. It's not having a deficit-based approach and we've got problems to solve. It's look how good we have been at solving problems to date. Let's do more of that.
Yeah, and I would say that researchers, especially today, have got the opportunity to change the world. And I don't say that in a kind of twee way. I mean it sincerely. The amount of instances and evidence now that we've got of research actually providing enormous benefit to society in so many ways is huge. And I feel like the way that the kind of research agenda is going now, and how some of these sort of cultural aspects that we've already talked about are promoting impact and engagement more and more. Any researcher that wants to change the world literally can. Yeah, that would be the inspirational part of what I'd like people to understand.
I was going to say there's something about respecting each other's knowledge as well. Your researchers have their place, and building those relay teams that gets it out there, that's got to be the way forward, really.
Thank you both very much for that. I think that was our respectful celebration of the opportunity for researchers to change the world episode and how to do that. We're thinking about impact from the beginning.
Speaking of impact through partnerships, join us in the next episode of Equity Lens to explore the value of existing research partnerships through the experiences of the third sector. Until then, think about impact with us with #ImplementEquity.